it's a great pleasure to be here. Just testing so the sound, can everybody hear me? Even in the back there? Well, that's excellent. So I didn't want to trip over that microphone. So it's just my own self-preservation sense. So I'm a bit challenged here because I'm without my normal assistive technology, which is PowerPoint, I think, which is ubiquitous, and that's one of the challenges, I think, which is great, about the Cafe Science series, because I think it challenges you to do things differently than what you might be comfortable with or used to doing. So you saw me maybe spreading out a few cards. So don't feel set back if you didn't get a card to read out. So this will be explained during the course of this presentation what it's for. I thought we need some kind of audience participation throughout this talk. Those of you who have been here probably a couple of weeks ago, I think Rachel talked about storytelling. Her view and approach to voice is a very particular one. So voice is also the title of today's talk. And I think she has talked about how can we engage people with speech impairments and storytelling, and I know some of the work that's going on in the School of Computing, and we work with Professor Annalie Waller. So today, deliberately, I'm not focusing very much on speech disabilities, speech-related disabilities, but I'm talking about voice in decision-making, voice in healthcare, and how I give you a little bit of background why that might be important. So first of all, a little bit of audience participation. Do you know this guy? I guess everybody recognizes a lot of nods. Of course, Martin Luther King, a civil rights activist, laid the foundation for African American civil rights in the United States, influenced a lot of people around the world with his nonviolent stance, with his civil disobedience approach, and also, I think most importantly, I think for the talk today, he influenced the disability rights movement in the United States. So again, another question, I can send these pictures around. Do you recognize this guy? He is, I would say, I think, the Martin Luther King of the disability rights movement. His name is Ed Roberts. Well, let me tell you a little bit, I'm sending the pictures around here, what Ed Roberts did. Ed Roberts, in the beginning of the 1960s, Ed Roberts had polio, and he spent all his nights in an iron lung. If you've seen pictures and images of an iron lung, it's a massive contraption, to spend the night in. He could breathe on its own with support during the day. Well, Ed said, well, I want to go to university. I want to have the same right as everybody else to access university education. Well, Ed Roberts lived in California. It was highly uncommon to see someone with that level of disability, impairment, to go to university. So that was unheard of. Well, he didn't give up. He wanted his voice to be heard. He wanted his voice to be making a difference. Well, he insisted, and finally he negotiated with the admission services accommodation in a medical institution, the Cowell Institution near Berkeley. And he said, well, but I don't have a medical condition, I have a disability, and why should I be in the hospital? And he said, I only accept that if you accept me into the educational setting, into higher education, if you allow me to treat that wing of the hospital as my dormitory. I don't want this to be a hospital. I want this to be a dormitory ward, a dormitory wing, and his request was granted. So he made a fundamental difference. His voice was heard. He paved the way for lots of students with disabilities who came after him to found access to higher education. So what did he do? I mean, he articulated on the basis of the Declaration of Human Rights that he has a right to access this environment. He wanted to change public perception. He said, basically, there's nothing medically wrong with me. Well, you can look at me through a medical lens. You can look at me through a diagnostic pattern and say, well, this guy has polio. Well, he didn't. You know, he lived with the consequences of a polio condition, and all he wanted to do is getting on with his life. So he claimed his fundamental human rights. And he inspired lots of people in Berkeley while he was there, so he didn't give up, you know, just getting access to university. Well, they claimed a lot of rights as the group of people with disabilities grew on campus. They said, well, we need accessible pavements, we need accessible sidewalks, we need curb cuts. So they petitioned, nothing happened. So what did they do? They formed a group, got buckets of concrete, and poured concrete onto those curb cuts. So they created their own ramps. You know, they became activists in their own right. So they made their voice heard. They also politically, I think, influenced the disability studies movement, disability advocacy movement worldwide. You know, we have similar examples. I picked out Ed Roberts, could pick out Vic Finkelstein, and various others, Paul Hunt in the UK, you know, various others who paved the way for equal rights for people with disabilities, but also for a move away from medicalizing disability, moving away from seeing it as a medical condition. In the United States, I think in 1973, disability-related affairs were moved from the Department of Health and Human Services into the US Department of Education. So it was clearly a nod towards understanding disability as something else, not as a medical condition or medical situation. It laid the foundation to seeing disability at a continuum, at a multi-layered continuum between what's happening with a person, the diversity within the person, but also looking at environments. I recently picked up a Norwegian parliamentary report from 1967, which said we don't have to just change the person, rehabilitate the person, we have to actually accommodate the environment as well. So the interaction between the person diversity, the person situation, and the environmental situation was recognized.